All right, so, we're all about getting into the nitty-gritty here, right? Taking these
Hmm.
complex issues and making them make sense. And today we're diving deep into something that's maybe not on everyone's radar, but should be, the Jones Act. Specifically, how it plays out in Puerto Rico. We've got some really interesting analysis to dig into here.
Yeah, some fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of folks, the Jones Act is kind of like, huh, what's that?
Right.
It's one of those things that's been around it's over 100 years old, actually, but it has some pretty major ripple effects. Basically, it's this U.S. maritime law, and what it says is if you're shipping goods between U.S. ports, got to be on American ships, ships that are built here, owned here, crewed by Americans. Sounds simple enough on the surface,
Right.
but when you start looking at the details, things get a little more complicated.
Oh, yeah. And especially for Puerto Rico, the implications are pretty profound.
So that's what we're going to unpack today.
Uh-huh.
What does this act actually mean for Puerto Rico? How does it affect their economy, their people?
And right off the bat, one of the most glaring consequences is the economic impact. Straight up, shipping goods to Puerto Rico, way more expensive than shipping to other nearby islands.
Yeah.
Like we're talking 2 to 3 times more expensive than shipping to places like Jamaica or the Dominican Republic.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It's like this hidden tax, basically.
Right.
And it adds up fast. Just for food alone, Puerto Ricans end up paying something like an extra $367 million every year.
Ouch. So basically everything costs more.
Right. Their overall cost of living is estimated to be about 13% higher than on the mainland U.S. And it's not just a Puerto Rico thing, by the way. Studies have looked at other island economies with similar kinds of shipping restrictions, and they see comparable effects. Negative impacts on economic growth, higher prices for consumers.
Yeah, 13%, that's not insignificant.
Not at all. And it's
Okay.
not just individuals, right?
Right.
Businesses in Puerto Rico take a hit, too.
Definitely. If your input costs are that much higher, it's got to be tough to compete.
Absolutely. Especially when you're trying to sell your products in export markets. Let's look at energy, for example, a critical sector for any economy. Because of the Jones Act, Puerto Rico can't easily import liquefied natural gas LNG from closer U.S. states, like, say, Texas or Louisiana.
Right, they have huge LNG facilities there.
Exactly. Makes perfect sense geographically. But no, instead, they've got to get it from way farther away, like Russia or Trinidad, so their energy costs get even higher.
Talk about inefficient. I mean, what's the big picture here? How much is this act actually costing Puerto Rico?
Well, the analysis we're looking at estimates the annual economic burden to be somewhere between 1.1 and $1.5 billion.
Wow, billion with a B.
Yeah, billion with a B. And to put that into perspective, that's like $1,050 per family every single year. And when you consider that something like 40% of Puerto Rico lives below the poverty line, that's a really serious burden. It's not just the direct costs either. The Jones Act also throws up all these obstacles to trade and investment. Foreign ships that are, say, heading to another U.S. port, they can't just stop in Puerto Rico. They often have to go way out of their way, rerouting through, Jacksonville, Florida, or somewhere like that.
Adding more time, more fuel costs.
Exactly. And all that adds up. For businesses looking to invest in Puerto Rico, it's like this extra 3% tax just tacked onto everything. So yeah, the economic downsides are pretty clear.
So we've got this economic piece, but what about the social side of things? How's this affecting people's lives day to day?
Well, if you think about it, the higher cost of everything, from food to medicine, utilities, it hits lower-income households the hardest.
Makes sense.
And it's not a small difference. Food prices in Puerto Rico, about double what they are in Florida. So you've got people struggling to afford the basics. And of course, that feeds into this cycle of economic stagnation. Remember, Puerto Rico went through that brutal 12-year recession. A lot of people left the island, moved to the mainland, looking for better opportunities.
Right, trying to make ends meet.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then when you add a crisis on top of all that, things get even worse. Like when Hurricane Maria hit.
Devastating.
Devastating. And the Jones Act actually made things harder. It slowed down the arrival of crucial relief supplies. Even the temporary waivers that were put in place, they didn't really solve the underlying problems. And even beyond those acute crises, you've got things like the electricity grid is notoriously unreliable.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
And again, the Jones Act plays a role here driving up energy costs. So it all ties together. It's this web of economic and social consequences that really impacts people's quality of life.
Now, I know there are some folks out there who support keeping the Jones Act in place, even for Puerto Rico. What are their main arguments?
Yeah, so their argument is usually centered on jobs and the economic benefits that it supposedly brings. They say it supports something like 1,000 jobs in Puerto Rico. and contributes about $250 million annually to the economy.
But our analysis seems to suggest that those benefits are kind of dwarfed by the overall costs, right?
Right, exactly. The analysis paints a pretty clear picture. Those supposed benefits. They're a drop in the bucket compared to that $1.5 billion annual burden we talked about. And there's actually a really interesting comparison point here. The U.S. Virgin Islands, they're exempt from the Jones Act. And guess what? Lower costs, no apparent issues with national security, employment seems to be doing fine.
So basically, the analysis is saying the Jones Act is hurting Puerto Rico more than it's helping.
That's the takeaway. It's basically saying this is a policy that's designed to protect the U.S. maritime industry, but it's doing so at the expense of Puerto Rico, their economy, their people, the inflated prices, the obstacles to trade, all those things contribute to poverty and hardship. And the solution that's put forward is pretty straightforward. Either get rid of the act entirely or give Puerto Rico a permanent exemption, like the Virgin Islands have.
Level the playing field.
Exactly. It's about creating a fairer system. And who knows, maybe that would lead to lower costs of living, more investment, more opportunities for the people of Puerto Rico. And, there's another layer to all this, something economists call dynamic losses. This gets at the long-term consequences, like maybe the Jones Act is actually preventing new businesses from popping up, stifling innovation, making the whole economy less dynamic and adaptable.
Interesting.
Right. Those things are harder to measure, but it could be huge in the long run.
Yeah.
Definitely something to think about. So here we are. We've got this law, the Jones Act, been around for over a century. And it's having some pretty significant effects on Puerto Rico, both economically and socially. It really makes you wonder, what are the long-term implications here? If we keep things the way they are, or if we decide to make changes, how will that shape the relationship between Puerto Rico and the U.S.?
Big questions.
Big questions, and I think worthy of a lot more discussion and debate.